Video games. If there was one visual medium that could completely decimate Hollywood when it comes to an abundance of sequels, it's them interactive marvels with the hoppity plumbers and the hungry disembodied heads brutally chowing down on rave ghosts. These sequels often give us little and massive change-ups. Sure, there's new combos, twists on storylines, upgraded graphics, etc., but rarely do game sequels just toss it all aside and start new. But here's some that did. Sorta. With new Pokemon Snap out now for you to test your pocket monster photography skills, let's take a look back at the OG 1999's Pokemon Snap. Man, you guys really need to work on your names for these things. How about, Pokemon Snap Super Hella Sick sequel game. Yeah, I'll workshop it. Anyway, the original Pokemon Snap was a cornerstone of my youth, and if you're a millennial who was also caught up in Pokemania back in the 90s and owned an N64, you remember just how exciting it was to ride around in your little cart and wind up in outer space chasing a magic cat embryo in a bubble. Fun times. But you probably also remember how much of a change it was for the status quo. 1999 also saw the release of Pokemon Pinball, which, man, if there was one great way to ignore your parents at Red Lobster, that was it. But Snap was the one that really made us go, dang, maybe there's more to these adorable creatures than encasing them in science balls and forcing them to brutally fight each other until they pass out. Red Dead Redemption, meanwhile, is one of those games where a lot of people don't even realize that it's a sequel to Red Dead Revolver, a far more straightforward Western shooter from 2004 with a pretty quick storyline, no online element, extremely limited multiplayer, no open world, and the distinct honor of being the only game in the franchise I've actually played all the way through. What can I say? I'm old. In Revolver, you play a handful of characters, including bounty hunter and series namesake Red Harlow, the Native American badass Shadow Wolf, this British gunslinger here by the name of Jack Swift, and a handful of other characters depending on where the story decides to take you. Not a whole lot of freedom to be found here, just a short, simple, and extremely fun, in my opinion, action-adventure yarn. At least that's how I remember it. Critics had less than stellar things to say at the time. In fact, it really didn't seem like a franchise at all, just a one-off game without much more going for it. Red Dead Redemption, the 2010 sorta sequel, but really just a total reimagining, takes a grittier, open-world approach that was later upgraded even further with the 2018 sequel, which, to be totally honest, I just watched my wife play. Seems like a fun, emotional roller coaster, and critics, and my crying wife, seem to agree, since Red Dead Redemption 2 wound up with a wagon full of awards, including Best Narration, Audio Design, Music, and Performance at the Game Awards 2018. Not bad for a franchise that started off with such a lukewarm response. Rockstar Games, the studio behind the Red Dead series, is of course no stranger to critically acclaimed video game franchises. Their most popular is of course the ultra-violent, ultra-controversial, and ultra-highly acclaimed Grand Theft Auto series, which began way back in 1997 and in its initial top-down format spawned a London-based expansion and a somewhat derivative sequel, aptly titled Grand Theft Auto 2. It was with 2001's Grand Theft Auto 3 that everything changed. Well, except the radio stations, those suckers have been there since day one. But yeah, this new GTA brought in a stronger focus on story and character, switched to a third-person perspective down in the streets of Liberty City, and generally upped the ante in every way, generating controversy, awards, critical acclaim, and 4 sequels, all of which have helped continue the advancement of the franchise and video game-based debauchery in general. But of course, they can't all be winners. Enter 1994's Pacman 2: The New Adventures, which took the 1980 arcade phenomenon, defined by its simple story of an anthropomorphic lemon head with a penchant for fruit, and made it a point-and-click adventure. Now, what's interesting about Pac-Man 2 is that it wasn't really designed to be a direct sequel like, say, Miss Pac-Man. Rather, it was a spin-off known in Japan as Hello Pac-Man, and was meant as a fun little side game for kids. Its status as a sequel is predicated entirely on it being retitled for its English language release, and without that, it's actually just one of many side games that are nothing like the original, including 1984's Pac-Land. Luckily for those who purchased the actual release of New Adventures, depending on the console, it did come with one of the standard games. So like, no, that's not better. It's kind of disappointing, but fun, but disappointing. That's fun, but disappointing. Speaking of major video game franchises with sequels that aren't really sequels, Super Mario Bros. 2 is a game that's equal parts really fun and really different from its 1985 predecessor. Pretty much the only remaining similarities are it belonging to the side-scroller genre, the playable character designs, and I guess its appeal to stoners? In reality, it was just a reskinned version of Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, a game literally made as a tie-in for a media festival with the characters designed after various Japanese company mascots. Why do this? Well, there was a Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 that's basically just like the first Super Mario, with one big difference that Nintendo of America just couldn't accept. It was way more difficult. This sucker was so challenging that they decided to take a shortcut in order to keep them sweet sequel bucks without contending with customers irate over their 37th game over during Level 1 of World 1. Don't worry though, the Japanese version was released stateside with the title Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. It's right there on the Super Mario All-Stars SNES cartridge, which every human being has stashed in a drawer somewhere. In 1998, Metal Gear Solid debuted to massive critical acclaim and solidified its creator, Hideo Kojima, as an absolute gaming rock star. A strange rock star. The game was a sequel to his 1987 overhead action stealth game Metal Gear, released stateside on the NES, and fulfilled the potential of the world that Kojima had originally wanted to create by utilizing the 3D graphics on the PlayStation to create more immersive combat and stealth systems. It also introduced even more outlandish sci-fi elements, including genetic engineering, turning what could be seen as a fairly simple stealth combat game into one of the most intricate and bizarre franchises in gaming, while also trailblazing with its use of cinematic cutscenes, something the sequels would get pretty long-winded with. Solid stuff. Back to weird choices, much like Pacman, the Zelda series has a pretty ubiquitous style, even with various changes throughout the years. It's known for a specific set of game mechanics and story beats. It's pretty broad, but the Zelda style is hard to miss. Whether you're playing top-down or 3D third-person, they're all open-world fantasy adventure games. Except for Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which made the questionable choice to turn the downright legendary original into a side-scroller. Well, there is a top-down view while you're traversing the map, but the bulk of the action is set within these side-scrolling segments, which obviously didn't last beyond this installment. Still, it's gone down in history as a mostly beloved, albeit different, entry. It featured a darker take on the franchise that critics actually really liked. It also featured some exciting new additions, including the character of Dark Link. Now, there were more side-scrolling adventures in future Zelda entries, but they were never as major an element as they were in Adventure of Link. Now back to sequels that kicked tons of butt and redefined their predecessors. Fallout 3, baby. This sequel abandoned the isometric 2D graphics and turn-based gameplay of the first two games, replacing them with slick-for-the-time 3D graphics and all the sweet real-time battle mechanics we've come to know, love, and get totally frustrated by. This was a welcome change that reinvigorated the series and turned it into a mainstream global phenomenon that would continue to surprise us with critically acclaimed epics again and again. Well, until Fallout 76 anyway, which, at least New Vegas is fun, right? Guys? Much like Pacman, Donkey Kong is one of those games that was totally of its own and helped to push the medium in all the right ways. Also, it introduced this little plumber dude who went on to something or another. Well, that little guy was absent for the third entry in the series, Donkey Kong 3, which did draw some criticism for changing up the mechanics of the previous two by casting the player as a bug exterminator, blowing poison up Donkey Kong's, Of course, that's not even close to as different as the Super Nintendo's Donkey Kong Country, which recast the Big Ape as a red tie-wearing hero, along with his family of other Kongs, battling it out with pirate crocodiles or whatever. Where 3 didn't go anywhere other than into the depths of our memory, Donkey Kong Country wound up being one of the biggest standouts on its console. And finally, we've got to talk about a sequel to the game I played more than any other during my N64 days, Star Fox. Originally made as a 3D rail shooter for the SNES, it was rebooted for the 64 in 1997 in what I at least consider its definitive version. Then in 2002 we got Star Fox Adventures, which like Super Mario 2, was originally designed as a totally different game before being redone to fit the franchise. This GameCube release is by no means a bad game and actually wound up being a positively reviewed sequel. But it was also far different, setting most of the action on a dinosaur-infested planet which, spoilers, is not very conducive to piloting a starship and blowing up giant monkey heads. But don't worry, you get that too. So what's the lesson here? Well, probably that the success of changing up any beloved property is generally a bit of a crapshoot. With some games, it completely changes the perception of the franchise, while in other cases it winds up being a weird footnote. Either way, I'm looking forward to more risks, even if they don't always work.